about. And what is the mindset right now on the part of Iranians? Because yesterday, JD Vance, they told us he's on his way to Islamabad. Then said that he didn't departure yet. What is going on? They're waiting for Iran to decide if they want to go there or not. What is the position of Iran?
Well, no one should waste their time listening to Western news agencies quote unnamed Iranian sources or the Mossad outlets like Iran International or whatever else they have out there that speaks on behalf of the Israeli and the Israeli regime or the Epstein class. The Iranians are not going, and no delegation is being prepared. Uh, there's no talk of any move, and unless the United States changes its policy, that's how it's going to be. Iran is not afraid. Uh, Iran's military has prepared itself for war. And if the Americans attempt to carry out crimes against humanity, U.S. pilots, as if they target critical Iranian infrastructure, of course, they are all war criminals. They already are war criminals, but their crimes will increase. Zionist pilots, of course, are by nature criminals. So there's no use speaking about them. They take pleasure in killing children. But if the Americans and the Israeli regime strike critical targets, Iran will do the same. And Iran has capabilities that it has not revealed yet. And critical infrastructure of the Israeli regime will be destroyed. And critical infrastructure of the regimes in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. These regimes, without them, there would be no war. The Americans would not be able to engage in war with Iran without the Emirates, without Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. So they will pay the consequences. And my advice is for everyone to leave right now, because as you know, if Trump carries out his threats with regards to critical infrastructure in order to kill kids, because maybe when you lose electricity, when you lose critical infrastructure, people die in hospitals, all sorts of horrible things happen. So Iran will have to retaliate, especially since the United States uses these regimes in the Persian Gulf. So, because they use the regimes in the Persian Gulf. So, since the weather is going to get very hot in the Persian Gulf and humid in the coming weeks, I think it's best for people to leave now and to cross the desert and to go to, I suppose, Iraq or maybe even Yemen, or maybe, I don't know, I can't think of any other place for people to go to, but I think that maybe Oman, but I don't know how much infrastructure, how many people Oman can take in. So in any case, people should leave. And also sailors on the ships in the Persian Gulf, they should be ready to evacuate their ships, because if push comes to shove, those ships will not survive ultimately if the war is expanded, especially ships that are closer to the Strait of Hormuz. They'll be targeted and destroyed. So it's best if all sailors should prepare themselves right now for evacuation. Remember, Nima, Iran does not want this war. Iran did not start this war. Iran never escalated during the war. And if you look at the casualty numbers in the Persian Gulf region, these Arab family dictatorships, only a handful of people have died. But in Iran, well over 3,000. Why? Because the Americans and the Israelis target civilians. They target people in their shops, on the highways, in their homes, at work. If they target a person, a particular individual, they target him with his family, with his children, with his grandchildren. Of course, the United States, targeted school children at an elementary school and never apologized, never expressed remorse. It is a barbaric regime. So um, Iran takes care not to hurt civilians. Despite the massive destruction that was brought about in the Persian Gulf, we saw that very few people on the other side died. And so the reason why I think that people should immediately evacuate is because we don't want people to die. But the oil and gas infrastructure, I think they're all finished, and the electricity finished. Everything will be finished if Trump carries out his threat. And so we're going to head for global economic depression. There won't be any more oil or gas or helium or fertilizer or anything from the Persian Gulf region for the years to come, and especially U.S. proxies. And so this is Trump's doing. No one should forget that the Zionists, Netanyahu, the Israeli regime, they push the United States, and of course, Trump is obedient to them for whatever reason, and they're to blame. They're to blame for what is happening now, and they're to blame what is to happen from here on.
Why is Iran not seen a good choice for them to go to Islamabad? What are the main obstacles on the part of Iranians as Iran sees the situation?
Well, it's obvious. We have a ceasefire. We had an agreement with the United States, and the United States is violating that ceasefire. And that is by imposing a siege on Iranian ports on the Persian Gulf. That's unacceptable. That's a violation. And therefore, we cannot negotiate under those circumstances. And if the Americans are going to start sealing Iranian ships too, which they're doing, that makes it even more impossible. So they should also remember that we have huge numbers of ships in the Persian Gulf. And all of them, those that are not destroyed ultimately, the Iranians will take as compensation. The Americans have no good options, zero good options. They have no cards. It's not that they have few cards, they have no cards. And more fighting against Iran will make it worse for the United States. And everyone across the world should recognize that this is the doing of the Netanyahu and Zionism and Trump. If people in Argentina are suffering the consequences, they know who to blame. Across the world, people should know and will know and do know who is to blame for this growing catastrophe. And we're at the tip. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The real misery is unfortunately yet to come. We're only seeing like higher prices and the beginning of shortages. But in the days ahead, it will get substantially worse. And within 3-4 weeks, it will become the beginning of what is, the people will begin to recognize that this is truly a catastrophe.
Professor Marandi, this act of, taking control of Iranian basically commercial vessels, as you mentioned, is violating the ceasefire between the two. And do you think that one of the main reasons that Donald Trump is capable, or the Trump administration is capable of doing this so close to the Iranian coast, is because of the ceasefire? And how does Iran see when this ceasefire ends, which is going to be soon? What would be the Iranian reaction to what has happened so far?
Well, Nima, first of all, the Iranians, you're right. The Iranians, because of the ceasefire, have allowed the United States the U.S. Navy more, and the U.S. Air Force more freedom of movement. But Iran has weapons that have not been used yet. Some of the weapons have not been used because the Iranians don't want to escalate. They didn't want to escalate. But after the threats that Trump has made about the extermination of the Iranian nation effectively, then I think that means that Iran will use weapon systems that they haven't used before. And I think that U.S. naval ships, all U.S. assets, Israeli assets, they will be more vulnerable than before.
Yeah. You think that I think one of the main arguments on the part of Iranians, which we heard from the head of Iranian parliament, Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, who happens to be the head of the delegation in the first round of negotiations. He said that Iran during the war has improved significantly the air defense system in Iran, and which we saw in the last days before the ceasefire coming. What was that? What can you say about this? In what sense Iran could achieve that? It was something domestic, it was some sort of cooperation. What do we know about that?
Iran's capabilities are all preserved because its key factories and research and development centers are deep underground. And many of Iran's missile bases haven't even been opened up for business yet. They haven't been used. The majority of Iran's missile bases have not even been used. Iran has been, I think we discussed this once. Iran has been using a series of missile bases from the very beginning because they don't want the American regime and the Netanyahu regime to know much about the other bases. So its naval bases, its underground naval bases, untouched. Most of its missile bases, untouched. Its research and development centers, untouched. Its factories to develop missiles and other high-tech weapons, untouched. So Iran is more prepared today than it was before. And the Americans can keep saying they're running out of missiles and drones. That's what they were saying for 40 days. And as we all remember, during the last 2 weeks of the 40-day war, the Iranians kept hitting harder and harder. This is not a war that the Americans can win. And if there is a ground offensive, have no doubt that the Iranians will let them come in and they will begin to hit them and keep on hitting them for weeks and upon weeks to ultimately force them into a humiliating withdrawal. Iran is not going to put up a strong defense to keep every inch of territory. Iran wants them in the country, and it wants them to get engaged inside Iran and then to tear them apart. Remember, we discussed this before. Iran doesn't like war. Iran doesn't want war. But when the war started, I told you that the Iranians want this to be a long war. Why? Because they don't want it to happen again. They want it to be finished once and for all. By the end of this war, the Iranians want to make sure that no country ever again thinks about attacking Iran. And this is what they planned for. They planned for this war for decades. And with everything that we've said since years ago, it's all turned out to be true. But again, in their arrogance, the West, the Americans, their media is pretending as if this is going to be easy. It's going to be impossible. And when they launch their attacks, again, we're going to see footage coming out from the US government showing all sorts of missiles destroyed and air defenses destroyed and tunnels destroyed. And they'll show how they've perhaps taken this island or that island, and they'll make it sound victorious. Just like the 12-day war, that's what they did. Just like the Ramadan war, the war that we just experienced, and we're finishing the ceasefire that's post-war. Both of these wars, Western media pretended, even those opposed to Trump, that their troops were doing very well. But after time passed, it became clear that this was propaganda, that they were not doing well, and that their assets in the Persian Gulf were being destroyed, and that the Israeli regime, for 40 days and 40 nights, they were constantly being hammered. And the US proxies in the Persian Gulf, who are just as, they're part of this Epstein coalition, some more sinister than others, but all of them sinister, these regimes. They took a great deal of punishment. But the punishment that's to come will be at a very different level across the board, whether it's in occupied Palestine or future wars in the Persian Gulf region.
Professor Marandi, since there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation happening right now in the mainstream media, basically on X, which is turning to be a totally under Zionist occupation. And here is what Donald Trump posted on X, in just reposting a guy who's talking about the Islamic Republic is preparing to hang 8 women. And Donald Trump says that I'm negotiating. I will soon negotiate with the Iranians. And I'm going to ask them to release these women. What is happening every time that they're trying to make some sort of, waves against, you put pressure, psychological pressure on the people who are following basically these Donald Trump. He's trying to mention, what is that? Is there any sort of reality to this sort of reporting that is happening right now?
No, of course it's nonsense. But those who killed people during the riots, those who murdered people, they face capital punishment. But this story of 8 women is fake news. It's basically to create support for murdering thousands of Iranians. And Western journalists will help because that's who they are. It's like Piers Morgan. I was on with him yesterday, and I think your viewers should watch the full exchange. I think it was very interesting. He refused to say that he finds ethno-supremacism to be illegitimate. He refused to say it 3 times. But also, there I exposed what he was making the claim of thousands of peaceful protesters being gunned down by the police, which is all a narrative that was repeated by sinister people and useful idiots. The useful idiots, some of them I criticize online, like these leftists, these people who pretend to be sort of oppositional, but they repeat much of the Western narrative when it comes to Iran. I told him, how was it that Trump himself admitted that he was sending weapons to them, and if these were just spontaneous protests and they were peaceful protesters, who would he send the weapons to? How does he know that they know how to use guns? How does he know who they are? It's clear that these are all networks of terrorists. And this was an armed uprising that the US intelligence and Israeli intelligence started. They're responsible for the deaths of fake. That was just a number to create an emotional environment to justify the slaughter of the schoolgirls that they carried out. The same journalists who are pretending that Iran is killing innocent women, like 8 people or whatever, or thousands of Iranians were gunned down. These are the ones who won't say anything about the 168 little girls who were massacred in Mina. So anything that they say is fake, it's propaganda. But too many people now see through this, and it's not going to work anymore. But I told Piers Morgan that if these were spontaneous protests, then who is he sending the weapons to? How does he know they even know how to use guns? It's clear as day what that was. Useful idiots helped justify, there was no justification, but create this aura of legitimacy for aggression against Iran. And this is what they're trying to do today. Every time they want to put pressure on Iran, they'll make something up. It could be tomorrow, it'll be a false flag operation. Perhaps in the United States, you'll see some attack on a synagogue, and I don't know, a few people will be killed, and then you'll see pictures of Ayatollah Khamenei or or someone else, just like the passport that was found in New York on 9/11 and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't take any of this sort of thing serious. It's clear as day that they're just preparing the grounds for aggression. Just like we saw Trump a few days ago, we were saying the Iranians agreed to this and this and this and this. Why was he saying it? In my opinion, he was saying it so that later on he could say they promised to do all these things, but they didn't do it. They didn't carry it out, so we're going to have to bomb them. This is how the United States works. And remember, the Epstein class, when it comes to Zionism and the empire, they're all on board. They hate Trump, but they'd love to see the Iranian people destroyed. That's why ever since Trump he's been saying it for weeks, that he'll obliterate Iran, that he'll take Iran back to the Stone Age, and more recently, he said that he's going to wipe out a civilization. Did you hear any of those major Western journalists with millions of followers, or hundreds of thousands of followers, or tens of thousands of followers, show any outrage? Did you see any headlines, screaming headlines in The Guardian or the New York Times about these are crimes against humanity and he must be overthrown, or he must be put aside, or he must be removed from power? No, because they're all the same. There's no real difference. By the way, they're removing many Iranian Twitter accounts. My Facebook account and my Instagram account was removed a long time ago. So I only have a Twitter account and a small Telegram channel, which you can find on my Twitter account. I expect that as things are going, my Twitter account will soon be deleted as well. And so if anyone wants to join my Telegram channel, it's there for the moment. You can find it on my Twitter account.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, I'll put the link to your Telegram channel in the description of this video. And anybody who wants to follow Professor Marandi, just go to the description right after this talk. I'm going to put it there. And Professor Marandi.
And by the way, I'm saying this very openly and clearly. If I'm targeted, the Iranians, I mean, there are others too, but some of the Iranians that I follow, you can contact them and invite them for your shows, your show, others for media. I will send you a list after this show, and I'll send it to other friends too. So there's no way that they're going to silence us. They can take away our accounts, they can kill us, but we won't be silenced.
Professor Marandi, when do you think that there were still? I think one of the preconditions for the second round of negotiation, if that happens, we don't know, as you've mentioned, it's going to be the putting an end to the blockade of the United States. Is that one of the preconditions? And what else do we have as preconditions, if there is some sort of preconditions informed to the United States?
Yes, I think it would. I mean, I haven't been in any meetings. I've only had phone calls with people who are involved and who are on the delegation, who were members of the delegation last time round, the people who asked me to travel with them. And my understanding is that it would be the blockade and the ships that were damaged or hijacked. So maybe there are other conditions as well. I don't know. So no one should take anything that I say as the final word, but that is my understanding. But the reason it's clear why the Iranians are not planning to go. And anything that you see from Reuters or these other outlets or this Iran International Israeli channel, these are just for psychological warfare.
Yeah. And the second part would be, Professor Marandi, which were the basics, which were the main points during the first round of negotiation. One of them is the Strait of Hormuz, and the second one is the enrichment of uranium or Iranian soil. And what is the case of the Strait of Hormuz so far? Was there any sort of messages coming from the United States? We know that they ask you to be part of the, they wanted to benefit from the Strait of Hormuz, which was rejected by Iranian part. How the things are considering the Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not, as you know, I'm not a part of the negotiation, so I know bits and pieces, but I don't know the details. But the status of the Strait of Hormuz has changed permanently. The Iranians are not going to negotiate that. The only country that the Iranians are going to cooperate with regarding the status is Oman. And everyone else is going to have to accept the new status quo. Whether the Americans launch an attack tonight and wage a 6-month war or 1-month war, 2-week war, or 2-year war, the status has changed for good. And that's just something that will have to be accepted by the regimes in the Persian Gulf if they continue to exist. Because if Trump launches this war and Iran is forced to do to them what they and their American overlords want to do to us, then these countries will cease to exist for the most part, especially the smaller ones, then probably all of them, at least in this current form. So, but in any case, whoever is in power in any area in the Persian Gulf region, they will have to deal with Iran as the entity in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. It's legally valid. It's not illegal, contrary to some of the claims made by Western pundits. And Western pundits should be more worried about the war that they supported against Iran and that their regimes have engaged against Iran and the thousands of people that they've murdered, instead of worrying about Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz.
We had a report on Wall Street Journal reporting that over 25 Iranian-linked oil and gas tankers successfully evaded U.S. blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think that shows somehow the limitations of the United States in implementing blockade. And it's not similar to what Iran has in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is benefiting from the Strait of Hormuz because of the location, because it's part of the Iranian, geography. And the United States came a long way in just close to the coast of Iran and doing that. And it's not the sustainability of what they're doing is important as well. As we remember with the case of the war of attrition, it's somehow a war of attrition between the two parties. And what is the assessment on the part of Iranians, and how capable is the United States in continuing these sort of activities?
Well, the Americans think that they can strangle Iran. The problem is that if they steal our ships, we'll take compensation from the ships in the Persian Gulf. Those ships either belong to Kuwait or the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, or Bahrain or Qatar. They're all a part of this war. They're all guilty of aggression, and they're all partners in crime. So they will pay the compensation. Now, whether it's through the fees that they have to pay to leave the Strait or enter the Strait of pass through the Strait of Hormuz, or whether it's direct compensation, or it's the ships with their assets that Iran takes from them, Iran will be compensated. So the Americans can take a few ships, but the price, what Iran will take in return, will be much greater. And anything else in the Persian Gulf that, whatever survives the war, many ships will probably be destroyed and they'll sink to the bottom of the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Oman. So again, the Americans don't have the upper hand, and Iran has many borders to trade with: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caspian Sea, which is a border creates a border between Iran and Russia and Kazakhstan, and then there's Azerbaijan and Armenia, Turkey, and Iraq. So we are in no shortage of border crossings to do trade with. Iran is a country that's almost self-sufficient in its agricultural products. This year, we've had a lot of rain across the country, and in Tehran, it's been better during the last few weeks, and we've had rain for the last 3-4 days. So agriculture this year should be pretty good, and therefore that will help with regards to jobs, but also the necessity to import foods would increase, or fruits and vegetables and things like that. So Iran is in a very different position than what the Americans hope. And again, this is not a winnable war. We don't want war. I'm stressing this. Some people, when I warn these Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf that people there should evacuate, they say that, what are you, a warmonger? No, but I am warning them of what is to come. And this is what their regimes have brought upon themselves by giving these bases to the United States, by allowing them, by funding the U.S. occupation. The United States doesn't just control the territory. Their presence is funded. And the war effort against Iran is funded, especially 3 countries I know of, Qatar, the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The other 2, I don't have information. They're probably the same. But in any case, these countries, these regimes, are fully complicit. So what I'm saying is that people should leave, because if Trump carries out his threats, those threats can only be carried out with the help of these countries. Their airspace, their air bases, the air bases the bases that they gave to the Americans, the civilian infrastructure that they're using and we know they're using, the ports that we know they're using, the deserts that they're using to fire missiles. We know all these things. So when the Iranians, when the war starts, the Iranians are going to retaliate. It is legitimate and moral. If Iran does not retaliate, that will only encourage the Americans to continue destroying Iranian infrastructure. So we are going to retaliate against those countries that assisted the United States. And when their infrastructure is destroyed, then the global depression will be permanent. It will be for the years to come. And that will be more than enough punishment for the actions of Trump. We don't want global depression. We don't want war. But if it is forced upon us, we will fight to the very, very end. This is a fight for our survival. And we are determined that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance survives, and that the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime and Zionism is exposed to the world for what it is. The world is going to see, and it is seeing, that the same people who carried out a genocide against the Palestinian people, the same people who are now carrying out genocidal operations against the Lebanese people, these are the very same people who are sacrificing the global economy for their own genocidal ambitions.
Here is what CNBC reported. His report.
Can you just one moment? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some reports from CNBC, and Professor Marandi going to be back just in a moment. But they're basically asking Donald Trump.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, here is what Donald Trump was asked, that he was asked by CNBC reported, you are saying that you need at least the prospects of a signed deal today or tomorrow, or else you would resume bombing Iran. And Donald Trump said, well, I expect to be bombing because I think that's a better attitude to go in with. But we are ready to go. The military is raring to go. And what type of deal is he talking about? I don't know. I don't understand, because there is no basis. There is no foundation. There was no framework being defined during the first round of negotiation. He's talking about signing something. What is that he's talking about?
He's talking nonsense. He's a psychopath. He's not normal. From from what I'm hearing from friends who are connected, have connections to people who are connected to people in the White House, he has mental problems, and therefore, anything is expected. But the people who want war with Iran, these Zionist psychopaths, they have no problem. They are pushing for the war. So he's speaking about, if you recall, 2-3 days ago, he said Iran accepted everything, and he gave none of them are true. They're all just fake. And Dr. Ghalibaf, in his tweet, he pointed that out very clearly. Look, I mean, what happened? What is the problem? The problem is that, well, first of all, the United States carried out aggression and war and crimes against humanity, and alongside, of course, the Netanyahu regime. But we had a ceasefire. The United States failed to abide by the ceasefire. The Netanyahu violated the ceasefire. Then Trump said Lebanon was not a part of the ceasefire because because Netanyahu was forcing this upon Trump. And Iran said no. Iran said the ceasefire is comprehensive. Everything, you have to abide by all of your commitments. Otherwise, we are not going to increase the number of ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz. So we will not carry out our commitment unless you carry out yours. And of course, ultimately, they were forced to impose a ceasefire in Lebanon. But the point is, during that period, a couple of 2-3 days, I think, before the ceasefire finally was carried out in Lebanon, put in place in Lebanon, the Americans imposed a siege on the Persian Gulf. That is a violation of the ceasefire. How can we negotiate with an entity that does not abide by its commitments? There's nothing to negotiate. You only negotiate if you know that the other side will be carrying out commitments. You have an agreement and you agree to do certain things, and the other side agrees to do certain things too. So if the Americans are already violating their commitments, then further negotiations are meaningless. So they're stealing ships, they're imposing a blockade on civilians, on civilian goods. Okay, you can do that, but we're not going to negotiate because you're violating. We cannot. So let's say we have let's say Iran goes to Islamabad. The Americans will say to themselves, look, we didn't abide by our commitments last time, so we'll make commitments again, but we won't carry them out. It's useless. That's why Iran is not planning to go under these circumstances. It's just not going to happen. And Trump can pretend that Iran gave all sorts of concessions. I personally think, and I said this a few days ago, I think he often says nonsense, obviously, we know that. But I was saying that if it's not nonsense like usual, then I think what he was doing was he was trying to say to the public that Iran promised all these things, and then later on he'll say the Iranians broke their promises, even though the Iranians made no promises. The Iranians made no commitments. But he's just going to say it for his base. His base is not exactly full of highly intelligent people. So, and they're, of course, not very humane people. Usually, the people who still support him, we know what sort of people they are for the most part. But anyway, he's saying it for them so that when he carries out aggression, and he'll be able to tell them, well, they promised to do all these things, they didn't do it, so we're forced to attack them. That's basically what I think he was trying to do. So what he's saying today is all nonsense. The only time that there were direct negotiations between Iran and the United States was on the day when Dr. Ghalibaf was in Islamabad. Some people were saying, you did carry out direct negotiations. No. Before the negotiations in Islamabad, there were no direct negotiations. There were only messages back and forth. And we talked about that. After Islamabad, there have been no direct negotiations, only messages going back and forth, which has been happening for years. So the direct negotiations were on the day that I was in Islamabad myself. I wasn't part of the negotiations, but I was there. That is the only day where we had direct negotiations.
Professor Marandi, from the experience Iranian had during the first round of negotiations, do you think that they don't see, it seems to me that Iran doesn't seem any sort of seriousness in the American part. And they're there just to make some sort of, even you see more things happening in Donald Trump's tweets or posts than what is happening on the part of the negotiators of the United States. What was the experience? What is the current assessment of the negotiators of the United States?
Before the negotiations in Islamabad, Dr. Ghalibaf and Ayatollah Khamenei discussed the framework, and a framework was decided. When Dr. Ghalibaf went to Islamabad, there was no need for him to call anyone in Tehran. He had authority to make decisions. However, Vance had no authority. Vance was, first of all, he was surrounded by Zionist assets, Israeli assets, because there were three of them: Witkoff and Vance and Kushner. There were three on the Iranian side: Dr. Ghalibaf, the Iranian foreign minister, and the deputy for the Supreme National Security Council, meaning Arakchi and Bagheri. So Vance was constantly making phone calls. And one of the people who he called, as we all know, was Netanyahu. And Netanyahu later said that Vance reported to him, which is revealing that Vance would have to report to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu said, Vance, like other senior American officials, who, I get reports from them every day. So apparently he's the president of the United States, Netanyahu. But Vance had no authority. It was clear. And that's why near the end of the day, the Americans became uncooperative. And then they, even though the plan was to continue the negotiations the next morning, they walked away. So what sort of negotiations can be carried out when one side has no authority? It is only, that side is only there to say that we're there to negotiate. So obviously there's a different agenda. If they're not serious about negotiating, then the plan was something else all along. Either the Americans wanted to rearm themselves and regroup. I mean, that's basically it. Or they wanted to see that if during time of, after the fighting, that maybe at the negotiating table, they could get things that the Iranians were unwilling to do during the time of war, which I think was, foolish, because it was clear that Iran didn't lose the war. They lost the war. So the Americans have rearmed, but the Iranians have rearmed. And the Iranians and the global crisis is like a ticking time bomb. So during these 2 weeks of ceasefire, the lack of oil and helium and LNG and petrochemicals and refined goods and so on has only increased across the world. Trump is only making things worse for himself, for the United States, for the world, and all for the sake of Netanyahu and Zionism.
UAE is running out of cash. They have reported that they're asking Donald Trump, the United States, to help them, and they're talking about getting closer to China and using yuan. Even they're talking about what is the benefit of the US base in their country. These are, when we talk about UAE, it's not even, Qatar, it's UAE, close, so much close to Israel, almost Israeli proxy in the region. But what does that mean because we know how the economy is putting a lot of pressure on Donald Trump, but he's trying to ignore that. He's trying to say, I'm not under any sort of pressure. What is that for the region? What is the consequences of that for the region?
Well, I don't think under current circumstances, if things go as they seem to be going, I don't think we will have the UAE regime in power for much longer. But one of the losses for the United States, the energy crisis and the helium crisis and the fertilizer crisis and all that aside, the many billions of dollars that would go each month to the bond market, that's finished. The many billions of dollars that would go to the US stock market, that's finished. The many billions of dollars that would go to purchase useless US weapons, which we saw none of these regimes were able to use. They just buy them as so that the princes can get kickbacks and so that US senators and people in power in the United States can get their kickbacks and commissions. That's coming to an end. They don't have money. And now the UAE is basically they're stuck because they can't take money out of the United States. They have huge amounts of money in the stock and bond market. They're never going to see that money again. I don't think so. But I don't think they're going to be around much longer as things stand. He said so. They're already in crisis. But this time around, the war, if the war is going to be like what Trump says, it's going to be far worse for the UAE than what it's already experienced. It will be fatal for the regime. That's why, again, I'm saying that people who reside in these countries right now, they should leave for Oman. They should leave, if they can, by plane. Tonight, or as before the ceasefire ends, they should leave for Iraq, maybe Jordan, maybe Yemen, if they're kind enough to accept them, despite the ongoing conflict with Saudi Arabia. But this is a very serious situation, Nima. We are prepared for war. We are prepared to be killed, but we're not going to, we're not going to bow to the empire. We prefer dying standing up. We prefer dying standing than living on our knees. It's not going to happen. And remember, all of this is because we are against ethno-supremacism. They will do anything. They will destroy the world economy. They will try to destroy the Iranian civilization to preserve the West, to preserve ethno-supremacism. It says a lot about the West. It says everything about the West, actually. And remember, again, I advise people to go back and watch my interview with Piers Morgan yesterday. I asked him 3 times, do you consider a regime that is founded and based upon ethno-supremacism to be legitimate or not? And he wouldn't answer. He wouldn't answer. And until the very end, he tried to, after he couldn't answer, he tried to attack me and insult me and attack Iran. And I kept reminding him that you're not answering the question. You won't answer the question. And that shows that in the West, they do not have freedom. And it shows who is in charge. And it shows who's the boss. And it shows basically what Joe Kent was saying, that the war is all about Zionism. They're the ones who have the power. The Epstein classes is the one who has the power. And when people like Piers Morgan are too fearful to respond to such a question, it shows what the sort of hold they have over society, over the countries across the West.
Professor Marandi, since day one, we had Iraqi resistance fighting together with Iranians, and we know that Donald Trump is doing a lot to put pressure on their economy. And they're talking about, the flow of US dollars to their central bank, and they want
Iraqi dollars. The Americans want to steal, because the Americans are controlling Iraqi finances for such a day. And they want to strangle Iraq to make it obey the United States. This is not going to work. This is going to have the opposite effect. it is going to create outrage, and it is going to make the resistance in Iraq say enough is enough. And so Iraq, Yemen, Iran, elsewhere, the Americans are too foolish to recognize what they're doing to themselves. They think that through hurting people and murdering people and strangling people and killing kids, that they can, they think this is the 19th century. They've gone back to to crude colonialism and crude imperialism of the past, not the sophisticated sort of imperialism that we've seen in the late 20th century. They've gone back, but this is not the same world. The axis of resistance is a very different, entity than anything they've come across in the past. The axis of resistance is resilient, and it will defeat the United States. If it wants war, it will be defeated. We don't want war. We don't like seeing death and destruction. We do not like seeing misery. We do not like seeing the world, Americans and the Israelis, to bomb our kids, to bomb our hospitals, to bomb our schools, to bomb our universities, to bomb our highways, to bomb our bridges. No, we don't want that. But if that's what they insist on doing, being the barbarians that they are, we will hit back as hard as we can. And we will make sure that they're defeated.
Does it mean that the calculation on the part of Iran is that the United States is incapable of negotiations, is incapable of making agreements instead of deals? That's why the battlefield would decide about the future of the region?
So it seems. So it seems. The United States waged a war against Iran, 2 wars against Iran, and it has the audacity to impose a siege on Iranian ports and pretend that it is humane, and its journalists and its political class pretend that they're the civilized ones, and their leader calls for the extermination of the Iranian people, and they pretend that they're the democracies. And then the likes of Piers Morgan and all the others, they demonize Iran as day and night in order to prepare the grounds for aggression, but they're too cowardly to say whether ethno-supremacism is legitimate or not. This is what we're dealing with. This is the West, and it is the enemy of its own people. The Epstein class, the ruling class, they are the enemies of their own people. Their own people are just as much victims as we are. And when the global economic crisis hits, and when we have depression, assuming that things go the way Trump is threatening, then the people are going to be hit across, across the world, will include.
Yeah. It seems that we've lost Professor Marandi. He's going to be back. And I'm going to continue with him with the case of, because not only Iraq is important right now, Lebanon is important. One of the basics before the first round of negotiations was the situation in Lebanon. And right now we know that Israelis have defined a yellow line in southern part of Lebanon. So the question would be, I think, for many of us, how would Iran react to that? Because the Trump administration is trying to say that the case of Lebanon is different from what's going on between the United States and Iran. But in the mind of Iranians, yeah, you're back, Professor Marandi. And
yeah, I changed my connection. And I don't know how it's going to be in the coming days, because if they start striking electrical power plants and these sort of things, in future, it may be more difficult for us to have these conversations. I don't know. I'll have to ask if there are places where I can go to do interviews like last time round. But since it will be, the nature of the strikes will be to target all Iranians and to destroy Iranian civilization, it may be more difficult for me to communicate in future. But in any case, I changed my connection. All I wanted to say, though, was that when the crisis hits, assuming that Trump does what he says he's going to do, And as he tries to exterminate us and the Iranian civilization, and his armed forces carry out crimes against humanity, this is going to this is going to cause a global economic catastrophe, and ordinary people in the West will suffer like everyone else, and they will know who was the cause of their suffering. It'll be Zionism. It'll be Netanyahu. It'll be Trump. People across the global South will know that. The global majority will know that, and therefore Trump is shooting himself in the foot. Zionists are shooting themselves in the feet, because the worst thing that can happen for Zionists is for the world to see them both as genocidal and as destroying the lives of people across the world.
Professor Marandi, we know that Israelis have defined a yellow line on the southern part of Lebanon, and Donald Trump is doing everything to make the case that the case of Lebanon is different from the case of Iran, which we know that's not the case for Iranians, for the way that Iran sees the conflict. Iran sees all connected. It's not only Lebanon, but Gaza, West Bank, Palestine, all connected to each other. And what can we say? Yesterday, I talked with Paul Carrick-Roberts. He is saying his basic point is, why nobody in the region? Why is nobody in the region asking in the negotiations with the United States, what is this Israeli agenda? The greater Israel. What does that mean? Not only for Iran, for the whole region, for Turkey, for GCC countries. Why is nobody asking, about this big question, which is the main question, which is the foundation of what's going on in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and right now against Iran?
Because they're proxies. They're all proxies. They're all a part of the American camp. They're compromised. I mean, if people haven't seen it till now, they're not going to see it from here on. If people don't see what the Turkish government is doing, then they won't see it from here on. If they can't see what Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the others are doing, they won't see it from here on. But Iran will not allow an axis of resistance, will not allow the Israeli regime to occupy southern Lebanon, and the axis of resistance will not forsake the Palestinian people. The Israeli regime is losing. Zionism is losing. The world despises them. And this will have huge consequences. And the United States will not win this war. So we have to be prepared for the days ahead, the weeks ahead, the months ahead. But time is not on the side of the Zionists.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Always a
कश्मीर में अखियां दी ठंड माया कर प्यार उड़ फेर न कंड माया कर प्यार उड़ फेर न कंड माया कश्मीर वे जन्नत